right choice of being a leader, the right impact on human beings and young people's lives. Vernon, how are you doing, my man?
Yeah, blessed beyond measure. And let me just go ahead and say what an honor it is to be here in the space with you all, such distinguished folks. And I will say that one of the things that I was sharing recently with a group of people is that when you're in great environments with great people, great things can happen. And I just want to go ahead and say what an honor again it is to be here, not only on your show, but to have the opportunity to go ahead and share with your audience. And I will say this real quick for those that are viewers and listeners and part of your audience, you know better than to come into this space with coastal connections without something to take notes with. And because I have a feeling, I believe that's a song, I have a feeling that this episode is going to be a great one. So thank you again for having me on.
And as we talk about the world and we talk about the impact that people make, you have these great slogans. So let me just hit your mantras real quick. No apology zone, the compass, and changing the direction of where you go. And me and Mike G were just like looking through all your content and just the positivity that you bring. So, hey, help the guests out. Where are you located? Give us a little background about yourself, and then let's get into the content, brother.
And say this again. Thank you for those that are here in the space. And I say with folks and say to folks and share with folks across all major socials, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, what have you. It's easy to find me at sign the THE Wright, WRIGHT, leader, LEADER. And of course, if you would say, hey, man, this Vernon Wright guy, who is he? What's he about? I want to find out a little bit more about him or see more of his work. Simply go to thewrightleader.com. And of course, you might be wondering, well, at sign the Wright Leader, thewrightleader.com, like what is this planned? Yes, it is. And for those people that have seen me speak before at different conferences about branding for educators, you know part of the reason why that is so. As well, just a little bit of an experience or background about me, because you're probably wondering who is this guy that they are talking about. And again, so grateful and honored, immensely grateful and immensely honored and humbled to be here on the show with you. The name, of course, is Vernon Wright, as I tell people, unless somebody changed it on the birth certificate and they didn't tell me. Speaker, consultant, author, leader, started out many, many, many moons ago in education in this little thing called this little town that no one has ever heard of called Dallas, Texas, being a little facetious there, and started out as a teacher. I was a job changer before. I had been in a space where I had been in corporate America. My undergraduate degree is in economics and finance, and decided to go ahead and do a jump and a change over into education. But funny thing, right? Funny thing is that my plan at the time was just to kind of stay there for 2 to 3 years and just kind of go ahead and figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And the company that I worked at before basically had said, hey, if you want to go to the next level, you need to get an MBA. And I had been thinking about an MBA, but it just really wasn't at the core of what was passionate to me at that time in my life. And so I jumped over in education, did that for about 2 to 3 years, and story within a story, right? Tell you a funny story. So I went to my mailbox one day. I was teaching at this high school. High school is pretty big, 5A high school, what we would call here in Texas, and about 2,600 students. And I went to my mailbox one day and saw this form, and it was an application to be a teacher leader. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, okay, well, probably everybody got this, right? Because I'm just like a year 2 or year 3 guy. I'm nobody special. Probably everybody got this, right? And so I started looking in other mailboxes because, of course, for those out there that have ever worked at a school that has a lot of folks in it, when you see the mailboxes, it's like a sea of mailboxes. It's a whole wall. And so I started looking and peeking in other mailboxes, and I was like, well, nobody else got this. So then, of course, at the time, it's high school. So lots of friends of mine, fellow coaches, and we were talking about some different things. And I said, hey, man, did y'all get this? Did you get this? Did you get this? And back in those days, we just called each other by our last names. And they were like, no, Wright, you're the only one that got that. And So fast forward, and had a lot of people that were really encouraging me to go ahead and jump into leadership. And that's kind of how it all happened. And in the midst of all of that, I'll share this one quick story as well. Um, I had someone from central office come out one day, and they observed me. And as a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, I think it was like an algebra 2 class. It was like many years ago when I was in the classroom. And the guy asked me, he's long since retired, but he asked me, he said, "What'd you think about the lesson?" I was like, "Well, I just hope it was okay. And I'm not on somebody's bad list." And he said, "I think it was phenomenal." And I said, "Well, thank you, sir. You're very gracious." And then he said something that really surprised me. And this that I'm getting ready to share may resonate deeply with folks wherever they're at in their career, because we may have some folks that are at, as a leader of mine used to say, she's long since retired as well. We may have some folks that are at different decision points in their career. And he said to me, he said, the way in which you express things and share things with the students is something that I like. And it's something that I think other people will like. Well, thank you, sir. Again, you're very gracious. And he said, so, right? How many of you know that when someone says so, there's something coming out after that, right? Something else. He,
Absolutely.
right. And he said, so I want you to start helping me out in doing district level professional development. And I was like, huh? What'd you say? Excuse me. Those that are a little more classic or seasoned may remember the show. Well, different strokes, but what you talking about, Willis? And so I had kind of one of those moments there, right? And he said, "Yeah, sure. I want you to do that. You know, I do things, of course, across the district. I want you to kind of help out with me." Okay, yeah, sure. But this is where my mind was, right? So the first time that I do that, I was asking him. I said, "Well, sir, if I'm up here and I'm doing this with you, how do I get hours for attending this PD?" And he started laughing, and he said, "Vernon, you are the PD." And so that's where my mind was, folks. At the time, I was, as I coach people on, I was so much in the content consumer frame of mind, and from that perspective, that I really hadn't switched or changed to the content producer standpoint. And that's really how my speaking career got started. So that's just a little bit of information there for folks.
You're changing the world. You know, you talk to athletes, you talk to superintendents.
Indeed.
You're constantly hitting a lot of different platforms on getting your message out there. What is the one main thing that you try to hit on when you're giving your speeches?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say this here real quick to those guys that are out there watching. There are two guys, particularly. Well, let me go ahead and give a little bit of a backstory to that, and then I'll go ahead and get into the main points there in which I try to share with folks. I mentor. One of the things I do at my undergraduate alma mater, on which I also serve on the alumni board. So honored to go ahead and serve on that. At Texas Wesleyan University, if they, of course, have a football team. And with their football team, I'm part of the mentor group. And so we mentor those young athletes at the collegiate football level. Two of those athletes that have pursued the professional course of play after or post college, I want to give them a shout out. Both of them here, real quick. One is Justin Arth. He's out there, a great guy. And the other guy is Trayvon Harris. And one's a quarterback and one's a running back. And right. And those that follow me on social media, you see me post videos of where I've taped them in practice and them doing their different things. And we are rooting for them in their pursuits with the XFL. And so that's an whole nother story we can get into, because I had a chance a couple of weeks ago to see The Rock in person and Danny Garcia and yeah. So I just happened to live in a city where the XFL will be headquartered. Officially, they announced.
So are they still going to set up the league? Because I didn't mean to cut you off, but now
Yeah.
you went down the road. I got to ask, because I'm a football. Because at one point they were going to open up the XFL, because we live here in Tampa, and they got it here in Florida and Miami, because The Rock lives down down south from us. So Are they bringing the league back? Or are they going to kick it off?
Yeah, so here's kind of the quick story for those that have kind of followed along with it. Of course, the XFL went into bankruptcy due to COVID, due to the pandemic. And as Rock told the story, I've heard him tell the story before multiple times, but like I said, a couple of weeks ago, about 2 to 3 weeks ago, when they had the XFL showcase, one of them here in Arlington, I got a chance to see him tell the story in person about how his ex-wife, Dana Garcia, his business partner, called him up one day and said, "Hey, the XFL is going into bankruptcy. Let's buy it." And he said, "Okay, well, that's kind of a cool idea." Because of course, and he shared a little bit about his dream of never really getting to that opportunity to play professionally, and of course that led him to get into wrestling and other endeavors, movies and so forth, and that is basically what has brought us to this point. So he, of course, again with his business partner, and then they brought in some other venture capitalists as well, and they got together and said, "Let's go ahead and buy this XFL thing." So a small number of teams. The headquarters, of course, is here in Arlington, Texas. And the season starts, for those wondering, the season starts officially. Kickoff is on, which is my birthday, February the 18th of 2023.
Oh, happy birthday. Wow. Awesome. I'm going to definitely be checking it out because, that's a big thing. I like when McMahon had it and then, nobody wanted to show no love. But eventually, I think we got to move forward, which leads me into my next question. You lead so many people forward in changing lives and they evolved. And I know people come back to you 100 years later and say, "Hey, Frank, you touched my life. You made my soul." So you had this journey of changing lives. So when you realized that you were blessed with the speech, the charisma, why haven't you moved into corporate America or became like that CEO guy that's working like Fortune 500 companies? Because you're a grassroots kind of brother. You got the swag, you got the gear, zero apology, you got the compass, you got to know your direction. So what keeps you down at the grassroots level? Because I'm a firm believer, and I mean, you've talked about this, and I've said,
Yes.
I'm a firm believer in education over incarceration. And I realize that if I'm at the corporate level, I can't help at the lowest tier. And I believe the grassroots is the next generation important. So that's not about me, but about you. What makes you stay at the lower levels trying to make a difference every day, brother?
Yeah, well, let me say this, man. What a great question. And again, so humble and so honored to be here with you all and to share. And one of the things that I was telling someone this the other day, that anytime I go to speak somewhere, whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, and of course, you and I had talked about this offline too this week as well. My desire is to go ahead and impart value and to add value. And kind of going back to and touching on and answering your question and touching on a previous question, or as I tell people, I try to make connections, is when I'm speaking to people, I often quote several different people, but one of my main leadership influences, which is the late, great Dr. Stephen Covey. And he often says this, or did say this in the past, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And so what happens,
true.
Right. And so what happens is, that's why it's just a great quote. And of course, for those that are wondering, his son, some people may be familiar with him, Sean Covey, wrote a book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. Great book. And it really opened my eyes to what are leading indicators and lagging indicators. And that's a whole nother conversation we could have sometime. But in the midst of things that I've seen over the years in different roles, as a teacher leader, administrator, district level support, a speaker, a consultant, a leadership person, in all these different spaces, the things that I have seen in terms of human behavior is, okay, we start out, we've got kind of a grasp on things, on how things should happen, and then things start getting added, tasks start getting added. Different people say, okay, well, this is going okay, let's add something else. And so what happens is, those that are out there listening to this may have heard this before. There's really this concept in real time of dilution, or as we used to say when I was a little kid, it gets watered down.
It's watered down.
Right. And so the focus of what really should be happening is totally lost. And here's a litmus test for those folks that are watching and listening. And thank you to those that are watching and listening for giving me this opportunity to share with you. How many of you have ever been in a space where you have asked someone, or you have heard a colleague or a friend ask someone, hey, there are like 30 things here. Which of these things is the most important? And a person turns and looks at that other person and says, well, they're all important. And so
Oh,
that
I know
really
that.
doesn't right. And so it really doesn't help anybody to prioritize. And so what happens is when we have a lot of different things like that, we forget the main focus. And let me say this here real quick, and a great place to take notes if you haven't already. And of course, as we always issue the disclaimer, if you're driving or operating heavy machinery or anything else, please do not go and attempt to take notes.
That's
Come
right.
back to this later. But for those that are able to safely do this, right, we condone safety, safety first always. If you lose the main focus, how can you take action consistently on what matters?
No,
If
you're
you
right.
lose, if you lose that focus, folks, of what really counts and what really matters, how can you then consistently take the action you need to take to get to where you want to get to? And a lot of people kind of forget this in the process. And so when I'm in different spaces, what I'll share with speakers, what I'll share with athletes, and what I'll share with the different people that I mentor and that I consult with and that I coach simply is this: keep the main thing, which ultimately leads to what? It leads to another question and segues to, okay, well, Vernon, what is the main thing? Well, let's talk about it, right? What is the main thing? What is the thing that you want to go ahead and accomplish? And then we know that we must have laser like focus, and not only laser like focus, we must have consistent taking of action. Because as I
Yes.
share this with folks, a lot of folks say, well, I have faith in this, I believe in this, this is what I want to do. Absolutely, right? That's great. But when we take action, and again, another great place to take notes, when we take action that activates our faith. And so people have asked me, they said, well, we believe, study, hustle, manifest, repeat. Where does that come from? And I said, well, let's go ahead and talk about it real quick. Believe, what do you believe in, right? Study to show yourself approved. Some people may know that from the second book of Timothy. Believe, study, hustle. Hustle means what? Well, at some point in time, folks, somebody's got to take action. Somebody,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And manifest. And I have several mentors that are outside of education. That's on purpose. That have said, hey, at the end of the day, if you're taking action, we should be expecting manifestation
Oh,
and then
yes.
repeat. So, in other words, if that's working, then what do we want to do? We want to continue to repeat that process. And this makes a connection to something we talk about in the business world, which is connect, impact, scale. So when we start scaling and we start thinking about how can we do this thing and how can we do that thing and how can we go ahead and replicate. How many of you have been in a situation where you helped to turn something around and one of the first questions somebody asked was, okay, well, this is great that it worked here. Can we go ahead and do that at 20 other places? So we're
Hoping the
employing to
environment is the
replicate.
same in all 20 other places.
Absolutely, right? So, but that's that. And so, what I would say is this: going back again and answering another question of yours about the corporate thing, and I want to say this again. I'm so humble and so honored to be here with you all today. One of the things that I did many, many years ago, and you spoke about the gift of being able to speak and the gift of, if you want to call it charisma, if you will. You're so gracious. I'm so humbled by that. I sat down one day and I said, you know what, God, these are the different gifts and the things that I have, and I totally dedicate them to you. Take my life and do something with it. And as you give me the message, God, and you give me the things to say to people, and as you give me the things to share with people, I trust that you'll open the doors and I will do what you give me to do. And I will speak what you give me to speak about. So I want to say this right now. And there's no accident, folks. Let me say this real quick before I say something else. There's no accident that you're here watching this. There's no accident. There's no coincidence. This is not happenstance. This is not, oh, I just happened to be here. None of that. This is a date with destiny. It's a date with your destiny. And you
I love
just
that.
fell right into this space. And so those that are watching that may say, well, Vern, I'm not even in education. I'm a, like you said, Vince, I'm a CEO. I'm in this business. I'm in that business. If you want to go ahead and say, man, this Vernon Wright guy, I like what I saw. I'd like to go ahead and talk to him some more, have him potentially go ahead and come out and speak to our company, speak to our group, speak to our organization, speak to our team. Would love to do that. If you go to my website, thewrightleader.com, again, a little plug for that there. If you go to thewrightleader.com and
Awesome.
And you scroll down a little bit, there's a section there where you can go ahead and click on it where it says interested in having me speak. You can click on that, go ahead and put in your information, send me a quick email, and the dialogue can begin. And we'll be so humble and so grateful to be able to go ahead and share with your teams and with your people.
Right. So you realize over the last, because I work in education, and the data points. So let's talk real quick data points, and I want to get your take on this and how you are implementing the data points. Then we talked a couple weeks ago to Patricia Trejo, who runs the Latino Superintendents and Administrators program, talked about the lack of males. Of Latino and African Americans meeting benchmarks to be able to, have a successful life in society. How are you really, as a leader and as a motivational speaker, as someone as so influential as a influencer on social media? You're seeing the issue, and you realize that we got to save the next generation, and it can't be done through programs, and it can't be done through throwing money at it. It literally comes down to being represented. Somebody standing up and being represented and having a voice and speaking to these young individuals on a regular basis. So how do you culminate that message to them to let them know they matter and that they bring value to our society, and when hoping that they will become contributors to the society instead of being a different direction of incarceration? So I'd love to hear what your thoughts on that, bro.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to make a connection here for folks, right? And this is one of these things, folks, that I want to say again. You cannot manufacture these things. You cannot conjure up these things. You cannot artificially make these things happen. When you're in the right space, and I want to say this again, when you're in great environments with great people, great things can happen. And this is a great place where there's a connection out. You may remember, of course, a few moments ago that I mentioned and said that Sean Covey, son of the late great Dr. Stephen Covey, wrote a book called The Four Disciplines of Execution. And in that book, he talks about a lot of different things. One of the things that he talks about is leading and lagging indicators. And so a lagging indicator is something where we look at it and say, okay, well, whatever this data point is, it's not really what we like. Okay. And then people start asking the question, how can I change the data point? Okay. What they don't think about, though, is the leading indicator piece. And again, let me say this, full disclosure, disclaimer up front. I am not intending to go ahead and replicate Dr. Sean Covey in the Four Disciplines of Execution, nor Dr. Stephen, the late great Dr. Stephen Covey. I'm not intending to impersonate them at all. They are greats both in their own right. But when we look
And
at
so are
leading,
you.
well, you're very gracious, sir. You're very gracious. I'm humbled by that. I give glory to God on that. So when we look at leading and lagging indicators, the lagging indicator is, okay, well, basically, where are the men of color in education, particularly at different levels? So that's a lagging indicator. The leading indicator in the shift in thinking about that would be, well, what are the barriers to entry? And not just barriers to entry. Right now, this is a paradigm shift. It's going to be a paradigm shift for some folks. So
Okay.
if you're watching this, you might have to look at the person next to you and say, hey, ask them, are you ready for the paradigm shift?
Are you ready for the paradigm shift, Mike G?
Right. And so not just necessarily barriers to entry in terms of whatever the qualifications are. And I want to throw a shout out to my good friend, Ken Shelton. If you're not following Ken Shelton, I don't know if you live on this planet, but Ken Shelton, a great friend of mine, and he speaks a lot about equity and different things in the space, but obviously he is a Black male as well. We often talk about this topic. And one of the things at a recent conference he and I were speaking at back in June, the audience was a leadership conference. Shout out there to Learning Forward Texas, great folks, and Learning Forward, the national organization, obviously, that sponsors them. We were talking about really this question of what can we do to really create a great environment for men of color to be in education? Have we really recognized that? Have we really stopped and really wondered about, well, why would a person of color, a male of color, why would he not want to be in education? What things matter to Black and brown men? What are the things that are on their minds? What are the things that are important to them? And this is another paradigm shift for some folks. Um,
I know. I like how you frame. I mean to cut you off. I like how
Right.
you frame that, and I think the struggle is experience, right? So it's like I tell people that are in the military. You wonder how somebody stays 30 years and somebody only stays 4 years. And I tell them it's really weird is that at the at the infant state of when someone enters something, that experience has a compound effect
Yes.
long term. And I don't think people, and education is one of those platforms that at a very young age, if you don't have a role model or you don't see something that looks like you, it has a compound effect. And this is Vince Bugg's opinion only. For a person down the road to make a decision whether to be. Because the reason I became a history teacher was because I ran into someone that impacted me to want to be a history teacher after I got out of the military. So with you stating that, it really touches my heart is because what you're talking is you're speaking to the truth, brother. You're speaking to the truth that you've got to be able to connect something to grow something. And then I'll stop there.
Well, and that really, it's like you just, folks, you cannot manufacture this kind of stuff. Like it just flows when you're in the right space with the right people. And again, thank you guys for just letting me be here on your show. I consider it to be a great, great, great honor. I was sharing with some leadership people in different circles recently over about the past 2 to 3 weeks that there's a certain space and point in time in which, and I speak about this at different conferences that I speak at, where we cannot continue and move forward by just doing the cognitive head fake. All right. So you may not have heard this before, especially if you have not heard me speak in person. But the cognitive head fake is let me tell you about my degrees. Let me tell you about all the information I know. Let me tell you about my knowledge base. Right. And that's great. But one of the things that I share with leaders is, particularly when we're dealing with matters of disproportionality and other things that deal with just the core of who people are, that work cannot be done and accomplished at a significant level. Please hear me when I say this, folks. It cannot be accomplished at a significant level by the knowledge you know. That's the cognitive head fake. Well, let me tell you about this that I know. Let me tell you about these
Oh, I love it.
statistics. Let me tell you about these statistics. But at some point, that person and each and every person has to put the mirror in front of their face.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And they've got to see, who am I looking at in this mirror? And that's where we get into things like implicit bias and all of these other things, and uh, biases against this thing and biases against that thing. And let me go ahead and say this too real quick. Implicit bias, folks, by the way, does not just apply to things such as race.
That's true. That is
Applies to
true.
a lot of different things, folks. I was telling someone the other day, talking about data, that if you're looking to go ahead and prove a point, when you go into data, you're going into that data looking for the data that proves that. And there's a term for that called confirmation bias.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, right. And so you said, well, I went in and looking for the data, so here's my data. There's the data that supports that. Well, just because you found the data that supports your case doesn't mean that your case is verifiable or that there is a great degree of veracity to your case. So that's confirmation bias there. But we must address, and we must put the mirror in front of all of our own faces. But here's a moment of authenticity, a la Brene Brown, right? Is this: if you don't want to put the mirror in front of your own face, but you're very quick to put the mirror in front of other people's faces, then this is often what I ask leaders. Then what is your commitment to this? But it's not a commitment. Watch this. Great place to take notes. It's not a commitment of the head. It's a commitment of the heart.
Absolutely. So spot on. All
But
right.
we
So
have but we have a lot of people, and I'll say this real quick. We have a lot of people, and I experienced this in my leadership career at different points along the way. We have some people that are in decision making positions, and emotionally they're broken.
uh,
They're
uh,
broken people. And
it's more than you know sometimes, because they always say you don't know what's happening behind the veil.
you really don't. And I will say this here real quick. I remember talking to a leader many years ago, and the leader had was sharing some different things, and we were talking about some different things, and the leader looked at me and said, you know, my staff is emotionally ill. And I never heard anyone use that term before, nor have I really heard anyone use that term after. Great place to take notes, folks. Emotionally ill.
All right, so Vernon, before we get out of here, you know, hey, it's been great having you on the show. Me and Mike G, we really appreciate it. But before you get out of here, you got to leave your imprint in the sand, because we down in Tampa and we're all about leaving the fingerprints or the footprints in the sand. If you had to give any small nugget of advice to anyone out there, drop it on me. You got the zero apology line right now.
Absolutely. Well, again, we always start out with gratitude. And again, I just thank you all for having me on the show. I'm grateful and I'm thankful, immensely humbled and honored to have the opportunity to go ahead and share with you all. And what I said earlier in the show is true. And it's not a joke. It's not a buzz line. It's not a phrase, a catchy phrase or whatever it is. But simply, I say this. When people ask me, you know, Vernon, have you made an impact? I immediately think about this. Have I added value? Let me say that again. They ask me, have you made an impact? The next time you go on a job interview, the next time someone asks you, hey, how do you go ahead and judge whether you've made an impact on someone or on a process? You simply go ahead and first think about, as I do, ask yourself the question, have I added value? And so certainly I hope that my appearance here on the show has done that. I want to say this, and people have asked me in different spaces, Vernon, when did your life change? When did things start to come together for you? And I will say this, a mentor shared this with me many years ago. Again, another mentor that is not in education. And simply, I made the decision to be a person that takes action.
Wow.
And when I became a person that was committed to taking action, whether I knew all of the steps, whether I knew everything from A to Z, or whether I didn't, when I became a person that became committed to taking action and taking action on the things that God had poured into my spirit, we should all be having time each day, quiet time, reflection, and getting and seeking and downloading, if you will, to use that vernacular, wisdom, so that we can go ahead and add value to somebody else's life. So again, number one, spend time, download wisdom, listen to the word. Number two, become a person that consistently takes action. And number three, always express gratitude, because when we express gratitude opens the door for increased altitude.
Oh! And that's it, people. Hey, every day you can make an impact, be positive. Vernon, we appreciate having you on the show. And as me and Mike G always say when people come on the show, keep it rolling! Next time.